Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here, and really have a special treat today because we're talking with literally one of my favorite authors in the world. Her message is one that resonates so deeply with me. In fact, when I was reading their New York Times best-selling book, It Starts with Food, there was a line in there which I literally want to get plastered on my wall. And it's something along the lines of, we're concerned with results, not history. And I just thought that was so profound. And she is, like I mentioned, one of the co-authors of It Starts with Food, the New York Times best-selling book. She's the founder and proprietor of Whole9Life.com, where you can find the Whole30 forum, which is totally free and awesome. She is none other than Melissa Hartwig. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
That is like the best introduction I've ever had. I just want you to follow me around and introduce me like that to everybody I meet.
Well, I gotta say, I am genuinely honored to have you on the show because your story is one that I can certainly relate to very, very deeply, and the amount of impact you're out there having and doing it in a positive, inclusive way is just wonderful. So let's start there, Melissa. Tell us your story because it is a cool one.
Well, my husband Dallas and I have been working together in kind of a fitness nutrition capacity for many, many years. We ran a strength and conditioning facility together for about a year or so before we started to focus more on nutrition and kind of well-rounded health and fitness, more of like a holistic approach, I guess you'd say. And we had the blessing of our friend and mentor, Rob Wolf, to kind of help us out down that track. This whole thing really kind of came to a start, though, with what was the creation of our Whole30 program back in April 2009. Dallas and I were sitting around after a really tough Olympic lifting session talking about the Rob Wolf seminar we had just attended and, wondering whether we cleaned our diet up, just that last 10%, whether it would make a significant difference in our training and our recovery. And I remember so clearly sitting around on the gym floor, sweaty and tired. And I was like, well, I would do that. When do you want to do it? And he looked at me and was like, how about right now? And I was literally eating Thin Mints, a box. I was eating a box of Thin Mints and I looked at my Thin Mint and was like, fine. And that's really kind of how the Whole30 was born, as we decided to do this squeaky clean 30-day kind of paleo style eating plan, but we put some additional sort of parameters around it because I tended to have some kind of neurotic tendencies when it came to food. I tended to get a little OCD with my food. I tended to get a little too restrictive. I focused too much on the scale and, my body weight. So we kind of approached this as can we figure out how to change my relationship with food at the same time as kind of cleaning up my diet? And the experiences that I had were so amazingly profound. When I say life-changing, it's one of the most important events I feel like in my life, this experience I had. And from there, really the rest is kind of history in terms of Whole9 and our Whole30 program.
Well, tell me a little bit about that history here, Melissa, because I think your focus on results and your energy and your enthusiasm has really, to be very clear, there's a lot of people in the paleo/ancestral space, but you and Dallas have really separated yourself out in a very positive way. And I think it has to do a lot with your message and just how positive and charismatic you are and how passionate you feel about it. What do you think has led you to have such a unique ability to change so many lives?
I think that's super flattering. I think that a lot of it is just the personal experience I had and the empathy I can have with people, men and women, but really especially women who come from a culture of body image issues, a dysfunctional relationship with food, perhaps a history of addiction or disordered eating behaviors or other sort of addictive behaviors. I understand what it comes from, what it means to come from that place. And, some of the 30-day paleo challenges that just talk about eliminating certain foods and only eating certain foods, it's fantastic. It gets people a good part of the way, but this is so much psychology. Mm-hmm. There's so much psychology in what we do. You understand that. You talk about that. So I think being able to separate yourself from just the technical aspects of the program. It's not that people don't know what to eat. If they didn't know what to eat, I just give them my shopping list and it would be the shortest conversation ever. It's understanding how to motivate and inspire change. It's understanding how to get people to think about this from a different perspective. This isn't about your body weight. It's not about the number on the scale. It's not about some arbitrary number that Weight Watchers or Fit Day or MyFitnessPal sets for you in terms of your health. This is about changing your relationship with food and feeling like you are in a place where you can develop some self-kindness and some grace and some just a healthy, self-image and self-confidence. There's so much more than just the food. And we really try to incorporate that into our program and our message.
Well, and Melissa, let's dig into that a little bit. Let's have a little fun with this, if you don't mind. I just jotted this down to be like a little fun little game of, let's imagine like the way of, and let's do sort of the stereotypical male here. So like the way that the stereotypical male thing would be to do this when it comes to food. Okay, now if you want that to maybe actually work for someone who isn't a early 30s male, here's how you need to do it. So let's do a couple examples like that, if you don't mind.
Okay, totally. So if you are, and we talk about this in our seminars, if you're a 22-year-old boy who's living at home in your parents' basement and your mom cooks your food and you don't have any stress and you don't have a mortgage and you don't have bills and you exercise and have lots of free time and some disposable income, your relationship with food and what you're doing with your diet looks a whole lot different than 40-year-old mother of two who's got a job and her husband works and she's taking care of the kids and there's financial stress perhaps and there's, relationship stress. There's always time stress. And she's got 20 additional years of creating these habits and relationships with respect to food. So you can't imagine that there's a one-size-fits-all plan for anybody in terms of how you can address sort of changing your diet, and there's no one size fits all in terms of how you talk to these people. I can talk to the 22-year-old kid living in his mom's basement about how if he changes his diet, his sports performance will improve, his recovery will improve. And I talk to the mom about how she can have more energy to play with her kids and how she can change her relationship with food so that every time she's stressed, she's not running to the pantry. You've got to contextualize this stuff. And I think that's really important for anybody who's giving nutrition recommendations.
Well, and Melissa, that's so true. And how do you, with some of these things, I think some of the challenge, and I know you must face this in your seminars and in your work, so I'm curious as to how you handle it, is there seems to be in some ways a paradox, and in many ways. Let me give two simple examples here, and we could dig into both. One is that in some ways, certainly there are common denominators, but yet we're all different. And so there's a bit of a paradox there. We should probably all be enjoying whole, natural, healthy foods. That's a common denominator. Yet we're all unique. A bit of a paradox. Let's dig into that. And also the healing our relationship with food. In some ways, one of the, I think, inappropriate critiques of the quote unquote paleo diet, which is really just eating foods that contain the most good stuff and the least bad stuff possible, is that it is too restrictive and therefore more stressful. So again, sort of a paradox there. So let's dig into the first one first and the second one second. So we're common, yet we're different. How do we address that?
I think you totally hit the nail on the head. There are some commonalities. I think everybody, literally everybody, would be better served in terms of their health to eat nutrient-dense, unprocessed whole foods. That's kind of just a given for me. And we know from the scientific research, we know from our clinical experience and testimonials that there are some foods that tend to be generally problematic for a good number of people. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to make a generalization, you can say eat these whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods as often as possible and consider eliminating some of the most commonly problematic foods for a period of time to see how they influence or affect you. And that's sort of the blend between the common denominator and the we are all different. It's like the tip of that pyramid that we talk about in It Starts With Food, the self-experimentation. I can say, in general, I believe grains make people less healthy. But until you take on that experiment yourself, eliminate them for 30 days, reintroduce them, evaluate how they make you feel physically, mentally, how they affect your quality of life, you won't know specifically how they're affecting you. Mm-hmm. So, common denominators, we can put a program out like the Whole30, which we feel like is a really good, solid foundation for getting people to a place of good health. But then people have to take it one step forward and do that self-experimentation part and figure out for themselves how to tweak that foundation to make it work optimally for them.
Well, and Melissa, I think in some ways, I think you actually just answered a question I had earlier as well, which is what has separated you and Dallas and your work out so much? And I think we just hit the nail on the head where you said with your example with grains. Is it true that the vast majority of people may do much better off in life if they were to avoid grains? Yes. However, if you happen to eliminate grains, then you happen to reincorporate them into your diet and you do well, we're here to facilitate optimal health and results. So if somehow you have a genetic mutation that allows you to do that, that's awesome. And that's what I love about it, right? Is that you say here's some guidelines, but you be the judge. The goal is results, not following some dogma or not following some set of rules, but just being happy and empowered and healing that relationship with food.
Completely. And I'll even take that one step further. If you reintroduce bread and it makes you feel like crap, but you say to me, you know what? I am making a conscious, deliberate decision to include bread in my diet because it makes me so happy, or it brings back childhood memories, or it's an important cultural or social kind of food for me, then more power to you. All we're encouraging is for people to make educated, informed, deliberate decisions about their food. And until you do that self-experimentation piece, you're literally unable to make those kind of evaluations.
Well, to me, Melissa, that's just a message. It's a profound message of freedom. Just not to wax philosophical too much here, but there's C.S. Lewis, who's a relatively famous author and also a pretty well-known philosopher, once mentioned. This is going to get probably too philosophical, but I'm going to go anyway since I started. Is he mentioned that sometimes people will say that a moral person is not free because they're moral and they're constrained by morality. But C.S. Lewis argues that a moral person can choose to be evil because a moral person knows what evil is, and a moral person also knows what it takes to be moral. Whereas an evil person is actually less free than a moral person because the evil person is evil and cannot choose to be good even if they wanted to. And let me try to make sense of how that relates to our conversation here. Someone who knows what grains do to them and has been on both sides of that now has the freedom to choose which side to be on. And that's really, I think, what you're talking about here is go to the other side and give yourself the ability to make that choice rather than having other people, such as food manufacturers or marketers, make it for you.
Completely. I follow you 100%. Absolutely. We're trying to empower people here, and we're trying to get them to increase their awareness. And when you do that, that's where you have, as you mentioned, kind of that concept of food freedom.
I love it. Well, that's the second paradox I wanted to dig into with you, is this, let's call it the stress paradox, where I personally have found, and it sounds like you've found too, that once you get more in touch with natural whole foods, it reduces stress levels dramatically. Like I think about food almost not at all now. And I used to think about it all the time back when I was in more of the old school traditional technique. But a lot of people think this is so stressful. How do we bridge that gap?
I mean, I think it's two things, and it goes back to like behavior and change research. I think one of the things in my kind of stages, in the stages of change model, there's sort of 5 stages of change. What I see very often is people get to the kind of, they go pre-contemplative, then they're contemplative, then they get to sort of the preparation stage, and they almost skip over that. It's like they read about changing their diet, they recognize that there's an issue and that they need to make some changes, whether it's due to crisis or due to, influence from somebody else or just their own kind of motivation, internal motivation, but they skip over the actual preparation part and try to jump right into action. And when you do that, it becomes a very stressful time in your life because you haven't fully wrapped your head around exactly what you're going to need to do to implement these changes. Mm-hmm. So encouraging people to plan, to prepare, to do the research up front. We do tell people, like, commit to the whole 30 right now. Don't tell me you're going to do it in a month or 2 months because the month is going to come and go. Commit to it now, but that doesn't mean you have to start right away. We've got a quick start guide on our website. We want people to clean out their pantry, do some research with recipes, maybe do some meal planning, buy some Tupperware, like plan and prepare to figure out what you're going to need to do to make this change. And that can make the change seem a lot less stressful on the brain. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is that what I observe is that most people's very practical or logical arguments against making a change are just a facade for what is emotional discomfort. So people will say, I don't have time to do this. I look at this food and how to cook all this food. I don't have time to cook all this food, or I don't know the first thing about cooking. This is going to be, I look at these recipes. I don't even know what half these ingredients are, or I live in this place where it's really hard for me to find grass-fed stuff and organic stuff, or all of those are very practical, logical arguments against something. But if you were to come back and offer them solutions, logical solutions, chances are that's not going to solve their problem, and it's not going to reduce their stress because it's inherently coming from an emotional position. So you got to dig deeper and figure out what emotionally is so scary about making this change. And once you can address that, then I think the idea of this creating more stress can be sort of assuaged in their minds, at least.
I love the idea of this coming at an emotional issue with rational arguments. Just doesn't work. And certainly we're all different, Melissa, but if you had to say maybe there would be some common denominator, underlying emotional reasons for this quote unquote stress, what would you say those are?
Oh, we've talked about this with a couple friends of ours. I think in one aspect, people are afraid. Of course, people are afraid of failure, right? That's sort of the most common one that you think of. People are afraid of failure. They've tried this before. They've tried dieting before. They've tried to lose weight before. They've yo-yoed. Every time they do it, they tell people they're going to do it. They start to do it, and then they fail. So they're afraid of trying because they're afraid of failing. Less commonly understood, I think, is that people are afraid to actually succeed. And I heard this today. I received a wonderful email from a woman today who had done great on the Whole30 and kind of fell off and couldn't understand why, because she was making such good progress. And what she very candidly said was, I'm afraid that if I do well and lose this weight finally and change my life, that it will change me, that people won't like me anymore. I won't be the funny girl anymore, that people will feel threatened by me, that I'll leave my husband behind. Like, people have all kinds of reasons for why they're afraid to actually succeed. And then if you look at it from a perspective of people who have chronic conditions, health conditions, this is a really difficult, the idea that they could potentially improve their health condition by making some changes to, say, their diet, is inherently threatening, because if they do that, that means accepting that some of their previous behaviors impacted or were responsible for their symptoms and condition in the first place. And that's a scary place to be, Jonathan. People feel comforted in the idea that this is something that happened to me. I have this illness. This happened to me. It's genetic, it's environmental, it's autoimmune. This happened to me. And if you present them with the possibility that not only did some of their behaviors potentially get them there, but their behaviors could also get them out of that place, that's a very scary place to be.
It's a very scary place, Melissa. And it's this paradox of sorts, because it is absolutely a scary place on one hand. And on the other hand, which oftentimes we can never get to, is it's really the most hopeful place you could be in, because ultimately, if the source of the problem is you, then the solution to the problem is also you. If the source of the problem is society, well, you're going to be waiting a long time for all of society to change, right? Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, it's like, oh man, that's the weight of the world is on your shoulders. But if it is, you can lift it up.
Yeah. But isn't that just a perfectly logical argument against what is inherently an emotional response, right? You say that to someone, and I've said it to people before, like, but imagine if you could get rid of what's going on with your body and all of these symptoms and this horrible pain and whatever you're feeling. Imagine if you could change that just by changing the food that you put on your plate. But there's something inherently terrifying about that concept, and you've got to dig deeper, because the logic in that aspect, while it's perfectly reasonable to me and you, is just not resonating.
And how do you find, certainly, I mean, when you have the opportunity to sit down with an individual one-on-one or even a small group setting, you have that ability to dig into that emotional level. But as this message grows and grows and grows, how can one do that at scale?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's one we struggle with all the time. We try to do it through blog posts, through articles on our website that are personal in nature. Either interviews or testimonials from people who have been there, done that, stuff from my own personal experience or other experiences from people on the Whole 9 team. if you can read something on our website and get that experience of connection, this person is, writing this and I could have written that, then that's a really good way to relate to people. But of course, you can't reach everybody with every article you write. We try to do it in seminars as much as we can, connecting with people one-on-one at breaks or at lunches. But ultimately, you just have to send as broad a message as you can, but as targeted a message as you can at the same time, if that makes sense. It's a really hard thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, I think it really hits on the challenge of we can have all of the science in the world and we can have all the rational arguments in the world, but even for ourselves individually, we're all connected wholes, and if we're stressed out of our minds and we're highly medicated and we're in a relationship which is far from optimal, then some of those things may actually be key to us solving our dietary issues, because maybe they're driving us to eat emotionally, or maybe they're driving us to seek solace in food. And if those things went away, our dietary decisions would become even easier. So it's like, how do we clean up our plate, not even involving food in the first place sometimes?
You totally hit the nail on the head, 100%, which is why, our company is called Whole 9, and there are 9 factors that we look at that we think are so important, and they're all intertwined. You can't pull them apart. Nutrition is just one of them, but we talk a lot in our seminars about the diet stress connection. It's huge, and one feeds into the other, feeds into the other, feeds into the other. So sometimes it can be really difficult for people who are trying to make changes to know which kind of string to pull first, right? As you're saying. So yeah, I completely agree.
Well, and the thing that I appreciate about your approach so much, Melissa, and what we're talking about here is it really shines a light, like a bright spotlight on how ludicrous the traditional just eat less of the diet that made you sick and sad in the first place is, because in some ways we're talking about we need to reduce stress. Like the more we can do to eliminate stress, the more we can attack this from a holistic approach. If you take a diet that already made them sick, and you starve that person, you are putting them in a more stressful situation. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's treating them as a simple mathematical equation, and it's stressing them out. What is more degrading than that?
No, 100%. And that's where you get into all of the sort of, failure issues, the like willpower issues. Gosh, we talk so much about how hormones are greater than willpower. And it's not just about whether you were good on your diet or whether you held to your diet or whether you ate the right number of calories. You're absolutely right. You can't break this stuff down into just individual tiny little components, and people are not numbers.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Well, Melissa, what is next for you in Dallas? Because you guys you've started a bit of a movement here, and I'm curious as to where you're taking it next.
Yeah, well, for Dallas and I personally, we're in the middle of growing a tiny human. So we've got we've got a few more weeks until baby 9 comes, which is going to put a little bit of a crimp on our travel schedule for seminars. But the most effective way for us to share this message with just as many people as we can is to get out there in the communities, to do these seminars, to connect with people. So we've started recruiting seminar teams. We've got one in Australia up and running right now who are amazing, Jamie Scott and Dr. Anastasia Boulais, who are doing fantastic work spreading our message down under. And we've got auditions currently in the works right now for seminar teams here in the US and Canada, so they can go out, share our message, share the message of It Starts With Food, connect with people in their local communities. We've got an amazing team of Whole 9 envoys who also act as ambassadors for our kind of what we call our good food word, who are spreading the message in their local communities. And we just encourage everybody, I feel like we're not in a position and we don't have the experience like somebody that Rob Wolf would have to make huge changes at sort of a policy level. Our mission is just one person at a time. Get one person at a time, get them on board, get them excited, get them to change their lives, and then they touch people, and then they touch people, and that's how you get a groundswell of change.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And do you see anything with the little Hartwig who's coming down the pipe here? Do you see anything in terms of, because one of the things that just, I think this is, in some ways, it is incredibly complex for adults. I think sometimes it can be a little bit simpler for children simply because they don't have the baggage that you tend to acquire with age from an emotional perspective.
Yeah.
And how, like, do you see any obviously with the little one running around, do you see maybe some customizations or some foyers into how parents can start to empower their children with this information?
And we've already started doing that with Robin Strasty, who's our director of communications. She successfully transitioned her entire family, including her children, to a paleo-style diet and has been writing articles on our site about that transition. It's going to be hard for us to have any street cred in this subject because people are going to say, but you never had to transition your kids. They've been eating this way from day one, and you don't understand how hard it is to like get them off the sugar and onto new stuff. But, I'd like to write more about it. I'd like to write about our experience. But one of the things I've learned is don't write about something unless you've experienced it.
Yep.
So I'm not going to start talking about how to make, how to transition kids into this way of eating and what to do when like grandma or uncle, Bill is offering sugar. I'm not going to write about that till it happens and I get some actual experience with it.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. I've always been interested to see, because this is going to start happening more and more. The idea of eat things that do as much good for you and as little bad for you as possible is not a fad. That is something that's not going to go away. So I think almost like you have vegetarians who it is considered a lifestyle. No one goes to a vegetarian and says, "Oh, you're dieting, you're on the vegetarian diet." Like just like no one would go to someone who's kosher or halal and say, "Oh, you're on the kosher diet." Like and certainly those children are brought up in these environments, and I'm curious as if we start to see something like that happen here for eating real, natural, whole foods.
That would be amazing. And I never really thought about it like that, but that's the actual really smart way to put it. Nobody looks at a vegetarian and says, "Oh, you're on that crazy vegetarian diet." And I think that's a perfect way to look at it.
And Melissa, I dream of the day where, you're booking your airline ticket and imagine, you're on one of the few flights that they still serve food, but right, there's kosher, vegetarian, halal. I'm not sure what they're going to call the one that won't kill you, what's that other? And that's the thing that makes it hard because it's like, since when did being healthy need its own disclaimer? It should be the default. It should be the normal, but sadly it's not. So
they'll have one column for food and one column for stuff you can eat. And you basically just check off which one you want.
Yeah, exactly. It would be food and then edible things and then separate things. Well, I love it, Melissa. Well, this has been just absolutely a phenomenal conversation. I so appreciate you sharing your time with us. And folks, if you haven't checked out Melissa and her wonderful husband Dallas's work, please do so. Their New York Times best-selling book is called It Starts With Food, and it is phenomenal. And their website is whole9life.com, and they have an amazing amount of free resources there. One of the best of which is their Whole30 forum, which is totally free, which is totally awesome. And Melissa, I really do appreciate you sharing your insights with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a really great discussion.
My pleasure. And folks, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Living the Smarter Science of Slim. And remember, this week and for every week after, eat more and exercise less, but do that smarter. Talk to you soon.